Chapter 4, 2 Samuel chapter 4. That's where we take up our study. I don't know if you've been watching the news, all these refugees that are running from ISIS and spreading across Europe. And of course now they're like, hey, we need to send a bunch of them to the U.S. And it made me think of how the persecution in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 8, when they killed Stephen, they stoned him to death, a great persecution arose against the church, and then all the Christians left Jerusalem and spread out all over the Roman Empire, and that really caused Christianity to grow like nothing else. And now here we are seeing today, we're going to see Islam explode and grow. Even faster than, I don't know if that's an amen, brother, but that's a... We're going to see Islam sweep. I showed a video when we were teaching through Revelation about how, I think the Ayatollah or one of those guys said, hey, in 25 years, all of Europe will be Islam because we're having 3 to 1 more children than all the other belief systems. And so, it's more than that now. But now that you've got all of these people fleeing ISIS and pouring into these countries now, it's going to really change the landscape. So it's just signs of the times, exciting things happening all around us, right? So that has nothing to do with our Bible study, though. So 2 Samuel chapter 4. 2 Samuel chapter 4. And remember in our last Bible study, Abner was, he was really the guy that was running King Saul's empire through his son Ishbosheth, who was kind of a weak guy, but Abner was the guy that was really running things, okay? And then you've got David over Judah in Hebron. So Abner got killed last week. Joab just run him through, with a short sword and took his life because he killed his little brother. Chapter 4, verse 1, when Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Now Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of troops. The name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other was Rechab, the sons of Ramon, the Beerothite of the children of Benjamin, for Beeroth also was a part of Benjamin, because the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there until this day. And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened as she made haste to flee that he fell. She dropped this baby as she was running, and he became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. Everyone say that with me. Mephibosheth. Now we'll hear more about him in a later Bible study, okay? Mephibosheth is kind of a picture of us. I'll give you a hint for future Bible study. Well, then the sons of Ramon, the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there all the way into the house as though to get wheat. And they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. For when they came into the house, he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. And then they struck him and killed him, beheaded him, and took his head, and were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth. Now this is the king of Israel, right? Saul's son. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, here's the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life, and the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants. But David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Ramon the Beerothite, and said to them, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, look, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? So David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. So everyone say, poor scared Ishbosheth. Poor scared Ishbosheth. After Abner died, he's really afraid. And a couple of his guys, pull a little mutiny. A couple of his captains, they say they're coming in to get some wheat or bring some wheat to the royal household. Now, Ishbosheth, I don't know, he probably shouldn't have been taking a nap at noon, right? Maybe that's, some of you like a good midday nap. Yeah, that's pretty vulnerable, right? So he's taking a nice little nap, probably when he should have been up doing something, I don't know. And these guys come in, they're thinking, well, the only other heir to the throne is this poor little crippled kid, Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. They dropped him, and he's no threat to anybody. He's not kingly material, right? So let's go ahead and take out Ishbosheth, and we'll run back to David with the news, and we'll get promoted and get, rewards and everything like this. But David does exactly what we expect him to do with these rebels, doesn't he? I mean, he kills them. And he doesn't just kill them. It's like, well, you took off his head, we're taking your hands and your feet off. And put them out in front of everyone so they could see what happened to these guys. Hanged them by the pool in Hebron. I mean, everybody had to walk by and see these two guys with no hands and no feet, right? Wow. So, chapter 5, then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. And therefore all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant, that means a contract, with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So now it's not just over the land of Judah, now it's over all of Israel. Verse 4, David was 30 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. So that's just kind of giving us an idea of the whole tour of his duty as the king of Israel. But what's of interest to me in these first five verses is how much time passed from the time he was anointed by Samuel the prophet as a teenage kid, right? And now he's 30 years old when he actually begins to reign. Now think about that for a moment. He was told by Samuel the prophet that he was going to be the next king of Israel, that Saul was not a man that God wanted in this position, and that David, you're a man after my own heart, so you're the next guy. I'm sure David thought just as you and I do when the Lord gives you a word. Well, I guess it's going to happen next week, right? Right? And why is it that God tells us something long before it comes to pass? Now, raise your hand if the Lord's ever done that with you. The Lord gave you some direction or some burden or some passion for something. Some of you are still waiting, aren't you? The Lord gave you a word that someone's going to come to Christ, or this dream of yours, this desire of yours is going to be fulfilled and met, but it hasn't come to pass yet. I mean, what's the point of all of the waiting? I mean, why not just tell us and then it happens, right? Well, waiting is all about refining all parties concerned. Waiting is all about refining all the parties concerned. Right? I mean, God's getting you ready for this thing, but He's getting the people that it affects ready for this thing as well. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I'm going to do it anyway. Long before I knew Lance, I knew Amanda. She was one of the right-hand people in the ministry back in Tennessee, and prayed with Amanda many times about the kind of man that God had for her as a husband. And I'm sure there were times when she was praying for a husband and waiting, others like, how come, Lord, you haven't brought this man that you've made for me into my life yet? Well, we didn't know Lance yet, but Lance was still running from God and doing all kinds of things, right? Right? And so while the Lord's getting, I hate to put you on the spot, but it makes a perfect example of this. While God was getting Amanda ready in Tennessee, He was also getting Lance ready in Mississippi. And when both of them were ready, bam, He brings them together. Isn't that amazing how the Lord works? So it's not always about relationships. Sometimes it's about career changes and things like that. When the Lord put it on my heart that I was supposed to be in Florida, I was praying and ready to go, start a church in Flagler Beach, Florida. I had a Calvary that closed down there. They gave me their building, all of their equipment, chairs and everything. They had everything but people to start with. And I'm like, well, I'm a church planner. I guess I'll just go to Flagler Beach and get a job and then go witness on the beach and start from scratch, right? But that wasn't the place that the Lord had for me. It was a place called Pensacola, right? Well, Pensacola wasn't ready for me at that time. They weren't ready. The people that were here, they weren't ready yet, right? Do you know that I had a friend, a Southern Baptist preacher friend of mine. He and I went to junior high school together, played basketball together when we were kids, and he kept really going after me to put together a resume and send that to Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. That's headquarters for us Calvary guys. He said, come on, I'll help you do the resume, and because I didn't want to do it. And so he puts this resume together of, all this stuff, all of my accomplishments and all of this. And the only thing I thought when I read over all of these lies, I read over all of this and I thought of the proverb that says, let another man's lips praise you and not your own. And I said, I can't send this resume to anybody. I just folded it up, put it in my desk, right? Meanwhile, this church was getting every resume that they could get from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. They had met with every senior pastor that was without a church in the Calvary Chapel movement that they had a resume of. They had gone through all the resumes and they had agreed, well, we still haven't found him. It's not any of these guys that we've met with. And they were so desperate by the time God brought me to them and that they said, a guy from Tennessee, well, all right, we'll give you a shot at it now. Now listen, as God's preparing you, He's preparing the other people. As God's preparing you, He's preparing the job. As God's preparing you, He's preparing the other person, right? Some of you have not yet had that first true love kiss. And you're getting you're thinking that maybe it's not going to happen for me. Yeah, it'll happen. But that rough around the edges old bird out there may not be right with the Lord yet. They may not even be saved yet. That's why you need to witness to people, lead somebody to Christ, and then bring them here. You catch them, we'll clean them up here at Calvary Chapel, right? And then after they're reading their Bible and they're passionate about the Lord, hey, listen, this is my advice to anyone that's looking, for a spouse. You should be running with your whole heart towards the Lord Jesus Christ. And look to your left or look to your right and see someone else that's running alongside you with the same passion towards Jesus Christ. Matter of fact, if they're running out a little ahead of you towards Jesus, that's even better, right? See? Because now that's two people that have the same kind of purpose. And it's one thing to be physically attracted to somebody. It's another thing to have an emotional attraction. Your personalities click, and you can go to eHarmony, I guess, or one of those sites, and answer enough questions, and they'll find somebody that likes the same kind of movies you like and all that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you what they won't ever be able to figure out is a spiritual attraction. Only God can bring that to you, see? So you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting. Well, waiting is all about God refining. So maybe you need to ask the Lord, Lord, is there something else that needs to be refined in me? Am I hanging on to some bitterness, some resentments? Is there something I still have not allowed you to be Lord over in my heart? See? Some of you, the Lord may have great ministry things out in front of you. I mean, wonderful things out in front of you. And the Lord is saying, you're not spiritually mature enough for the ministry calling that I've placed on your life. And you need to be getting into my word. You need to be on your knees in prayer more, and so forth and so on, right? So waiting, it's all about refining. David was told when he's a kid he's going to be king, and all those years later, he's a grown man now when he actually is reigning in all of Israel. Let's read on. Verse 6, and the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. Remember, Jerusalem still has not been conquered yet. Enemy tribe called the Jebusites occupied Jerusalem. The inhabitants of the land who spoke to David, saying, you shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will repel you, thinking David cannot come in here. Well, they were kind of taunting David, like, yeah, we can take the weakest guys we got and hold the city. And there's no way you can break through and get into Jerusalem. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion. Zion. Maybe you've seen movies that use Zion and The Matrix. You know, they use the word Zion. And that's just another name for Jerusalem. Wow. David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. Now David said on that day, whoever climbs up by way of the water shaft and defeats the Jebusites, that is the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Therefore they say the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And then David dwelt in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built all around from the Milo and inward. And so David went on and became great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him. So the first order of business he has now that he's king of all Israel is to conquer and obtain Jerusalem and make it his headquarters. Then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house. So David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of David. Is that what it says? No. It says for the sake of his people, Israel. That's important, guys. He didn't raise up David for David. He raised up David for the sake of the people. This church does not exist to take care of Pastor Philip. Pastor Philip exists to take care of the people of this church. I'm not the leader in charge. I'm the servant. And if I don't serve you well enough, forgive me for that. I'm working on it. Right? David had a shepherd's heart, and God lifted him up for the sake of the people of Israel. And David, verse 13, everyone say uh-oh. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem. So now he's got a couple of Jebusite gals there, right? After he had come from Hebron, also more sons and daughters were born to David. Now these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem. Now they're not all born at this time, but this is like an overview of all the sons, right? Shemua, who later went on to work at SeaWorld, and just seeing if you're with me. Shemua, Shobab, Nathan. You can circle Nathan. Why? Because that's the one through which the Messiah is going to come through. Nathan. Solomon. Solomon is the decoy. Yeah, that's the one that the enemy, Satan, probably thinks, oh, it's Solomon, right? Because God's given him all this wisdom and everything. But there would be a descendant of Solomon's that would have a curse on him, Jeconiah, whatever, that would prophesy that the blood of the Messiah could not pass through that line. But Nathan is the one that Mary's lineage is through Nathan, and Joseph's lineage is through Solomon. But remember, Joseph is just the legal father of Jesus in Matthew's gospel. He's not the true father, right? So there's Nathan, there's Solomon, there's Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhiah, Elishama, Eliada, Eliphalet. I'm probably butchering all those names. Now when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. And David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. And the Philistines also went and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord. This is what's amazing to me about David. Every time he comes up against an enemy force, instead of just going right into the strategy mode and preparing for war mode, he always goes to God in prayer first. You need to go to God in prayer first. I mean, think about how often we get some sort of a bad news or stressful situation, and we go to the computer before we go to our knees in prayer. I used to say go to your phone, but now it's like everyone's typing out a text message or a Facebook Messenger, telling everybody about all the stuff going on in their life instead of going to God first. We need to go to God first. Okay, even Pastor Philip, when you tell me something, I can pray for you, but I can't fix what ails you. Only God can do all of those things, right? And so David inquired of the Lord, verse 19, saying, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand?" And the Lord said to David, "Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand." So David went to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there, and he said, "The Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water." Therefore he called the name of that place Baal Perazim. And they left their images there, and David and his men carried them away. So he inquires of God. God says, "I got this under control. Don't worry about it. It's going to be fine." And after he whips everybody, he renames it from the valley of Rephaim. He names it now Baal Perazim, which means Baal is broken. We broke them there, right? So happy ending there. Verse 22, then the Philistines went up once again and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. Same place, same enemy. And David didn't bother to inquire of the Lord because the Lord already told him once, and he's already fought these people in the same spot. Is that what it says? Therefore David inquired of the Lord, and he said, "You shall not go up. Circle around behind them and come up upon them in front of the mulberry trees. And it shall be when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the mulberry trees." That's the acoustics. He had picked up that sound and held it in the top of those trees, and you could hear it, right? "Then you shall advance quickly, for then the Lord will go out before you to strike the camp of the Philistines." And David did so as the Lord commanded him, and he drove back the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. So note that he didn't assume God's guidance from the previous battle would be the same for this new one. If you're taking notes, guys, we've got to constantly seek God's will for everything. You can't ever say, "Well, I've already prayed about this before. I know it's a different situation, but it's basically the same thing, and just go ahead and wing it." No. We're supposed to talk to God about everything, right? Pray about everything. God's strategy for the first battle was a direct offensive attack, but the next one required an ambush. Again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. Everyone say 30,000. 30,000, that's right, 30,000 troops. He got them all together. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name, the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. And they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God. we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, right? Indiana Jones, remember that? Ark of the Covenant? Okay. So they've got this on a new cart, and they're accompanying this, the Ark of God, and Ahio went before the Ark. And then David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord on all kinds of instruments of fir wood, on harps, on string instruments, on tambourines, on sistrums, and on cymbals. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, everyone say amen if you're still listening. Amen. Okay. So they got to this threshing floor place. Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. Now, can you just picture this? David's thinking, well, we've got Jerusalem now. We've got kings helping me build a big fancy house out of cedar wood and all this. Everything's coming together. The Lord's blessing everything. Hey, it's about time we go and get the Ark of the Covenant and bring that to headquarters. And so let's go to Kirjath Jearim, to Abinadab's house. It's been there for many years, and everyone knew how that guy was being blessed because the Ark of the Covenant was there. And David says, well, let's just go ahead and make a new cart and transport it to Jerusalem. The problem with that, God had instructed that the ark must be carried with these special poles that were overlaid with gold, supported on the shoulders of the Kohathites. And Kohath there were three families that were responsible within the tribe of Levi for packing up the tabernacle and all of this when they moved, right? Kohath was responsible for this, for the transport of the Ark of the Covenant. And so Numbers chapter 7 lays all this out for us. But David doesn't do it that way, does he? He doesn't go and get any Kohathites and anything. He just makes a new cart and he goes to Abinadab's house, and Abinadab says, well, yeah, we keep it in our barn over here, and I'll have my two boys help you with this. One of them out in front, the other one by the side of this new cart and everything. And poor Uzzah, he had become so familiar with the ark. I mean, think of how many times he had gone into the barn to sneak a peek at it and look at it and everything, right? And so the oxen stumbles, so surely he can take a little liberty and touch the ark to keep it from falling off the cart, right? When the oxen stumbled. But when he did that, God zapped him. And we don't know how God zapped him, right? We don't know whether a lightning bolt, whether lightning came from the ark itself or dropped down from the sky, or whether some disease that just kind of ate him up like Ebola or something, just ate him to the bone. We don't know how he died, but he died instantly, right? I mean, just crazy scene, right? Poor Uzzah. That's a name you think it would stick into your mind, right? Years ago, we had a life group type of a meeting that was happening in our house. And there was this couple that was attending this thing, and the guy was a little bit, I think he had a problem with authority, had been burned by some pastor, some church, whatever. And he just wasn't very teachable. He was always kind of trying to show me up in front of everyone. And this is before we were a Calvary Chapel, before I was a man of the Word and studying the Word the way I do now. And right in front of everybody, he says, hey, you're a preacher. What's the name of the guy that tried to keep the Ark of the Covenant from falling, and God zapped him and killed him right on the spot? And I remember thinking, Lord, I don't have a clue who it is. But this guy's trying to show me up in front of, the sheep. And I need a little help here. And I went, Uzzah? His mouth dropped open. Wow, how do you know that? Well, because I'm the pastor around here. Honest to goodness, that happened, right? The name just popped into my head. I didn't know it, Now I know it now because that is this instance. But everyone say Uzzah. Everyone say poor Uzzah. Okay, I don't want to forget this guy, see? This guy thought it would be okay to steady the Ark of the Covenant on this new cart and to keep it from falling, even though nobody but the tribe of Levi and the family of the Kohathites in the tribe of Levi, they were the only ones that were permitted to touch this thing, right? But it's been in his barn for years. I mean, surely God's okay with it by now, right? After all, David made a new cart. He didn't have it transported the way it's supposed to be transported. And he's taken all these liberties with the law since he's bringing it home. And you can see why David was taking all these liberties, right? The book of Deuteronomy 17:17 expressly says that kings are not to multiply wives, right? And what's David doing? Wife, 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 wife. And everything seems to be going fine for old King David, so I guess I can take liberties and do things my own way. And so God's blessing his kingdom, so he's like, well, let's go ahead and bring that Ark of the Covenant back, and I know I need to get some Kohathites, but I don't want to fool with Kohathites. That seems like a lot of trouble. I mean, I've got all these wives, nothing bad's happened, everything's going just fine. I'll just make a new cart. That ought to be good enough for God, right? Listen. If God tells us to do something, he wants us to do it exactly the way he told us to do it. How often do we take liberties and not do it exactly the way the Lord told us to do it? Now you think about how God tells you to act exactly as an employee, to do all your work as unto the Lord. As a spouse, husbands, love your wives like Christ loves the church. Wives, submit or respond to your husbands, right? I mean, think about it. What do? We give ourselves all this wiggle room. Well, it doesn't really mean it like that. I guess I can just make a new cart, and that ought to be good enough, right? And here in the Old Testament, we see an instance in which God zapped somebody to say, hey, you guys stop with all the liberties and do exactly as I say. Now, why do we take liberties in the first place? Quite often it's because we're doing something that we don't think we have to do, right? Have you ever taken it upon yourself to do something for somebody, and then you did it in kind of a half-hearted way because you didn't really have to do it in the first place, right? Greg's not here, so I can talk about him. When he first got saved, I remember him coming on Saturday night men's prayer thing and telling us about how the Lord put it in his heart to get an air conditioner for some poor lady that lived, near him, right? So he got an air conditioner and brought it to her, and she said, "That's not big enough. That won't work. You need to go get something bigger." And you got to hear him. He's a great storyteller. But Greg said, I thought to myself, well, I didn't have to do this in the first place. You should be happy I'm bringing you a air conditioner. And the Lord really got with him and said, well, who are you doing this for her, or because I told you to do it? If I told you to do it the right way. So he goes and finagles at a pawn shop or something and goes and gets the big air conditioner. And I think she complained the whole time he put it in. He's doing this for her free, right? But we all kind of, if we take it upon ourselves to do something, well, I think I'm going to help out in the church. I'm going to sign up for children's church. And then the Sunday comes that you signed up for children's church. I mean, nobody twisted your arm, made you, but you signed up to do it. Well, I don't feel that well today. I think I need to take a day off. I need a little me time. I'm just going to stay home. I'll have church at home. I'll watch Charles Stanley in my pajamas with my coffee, and I'll just have a great time with the Lord. I'm sure they'll find some poor soul to take those rotten kids one more Sunday, right? Right? Now, I'm stretching this, but you know what I'm saying. We don't do things the right way. Like we've got all this wiggle room to do it however we want to do it. This guy gets zapped because they're not doing this the right way. Let's read on. Verse 8, and David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak, and that almost implies a disease kind of a thing, like Ebola or something like that, against Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? Now, listen, being afraid of God is one of the best things that you and I can do. I don't mean like God is the great and powerful Oz and fire and lightning and we need to run scared like the cowardly lion, right? Right? I'm talking about having an appropriate reverence for God, see? In fact, we've got all our fear in all the wrong places, right? All across this city there are pastors. You know, pastor means a shepherd. That's all I am. I'm looking after sheep as a sheep myself. But there are pastors all over this town that call themselves reverend. Reverend? What? You? We're supposed to reverence you? Do you know that the word for reverend, that I think yareh is the Hebrew word there. It is a word that is meant exclusively to be used in speaking of God himself. We are to be fearful of the reverend God. We are supposed to have appropriate reverence toward God. We got people that are afraid of men, but they're not afraid of God anymore. They do whatever they want, however they want to do it, and they think that God's just going to wink at it. It's just not a big deal. And God deals harshly in this situation to change the atmosphere. You know, this is God letting everyone know that he's in charge, not David, not Uzzah, because he's had it in his barn for a lot of years. Guys, trust me, I know how to transport this thing. We've had it in the barn, you know, right? You can see how a guy would be talking it up, right? And this is God saying, no, Uzzah's not in charge. David, you're not in charge either. I'm in charge. Y'all better go back and open up those Torah scrolls and read how I said to transport this thing. So, verse 10, so David would not move the ark of the Lord with him into the city of David. But David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. Now it was told King David, saying, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. And so it was when those bearing the ark of the Lord, and guess who that was? That was the Kohathites. He went and got him some Kohathites for this time around. And you may say I'm reading a whole lot into this. Well, 1 Chronicles 15 is the parallel passage to this story. And it tells us that David went and re-educated himself on how it was supposed to be transported and all this. And he goes and gets himself some Kohathites, right? So he's handling it the right way. And so it was when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. So now picture this for a second. I read it. I reread it. I got a bunch of Kohathites and I had them read it. But I'm not quite sure that somebody's not going to get zapped just like that poor Uzzah did. So they